Hi there guys, so there's an interesting article on the BBC website today which is talking about the exorbitant cost of school uniform for families who are already struggling with the cost of living crisis. So I'm just going to have a quick look at the article here. So it says struggling families need grants for school uniforms, and then it talks about how a report from one of the UK's largest debt advisors recommends that grants should be given as standard to families who are already struggling with the cost of living. So it says in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, all families on certain benefits can claim between £93 to £200 per child for back to school clothing. But in England, only a fifth of councils offer any support. And so the charity has called on the UK government to introduce a statutory school clothing grant. So it said the DfE said it was already changing the law to limit the number of branded items school can insist on, saving some families over £50 on the back to school shop. And then this is absolutely shocking. However, the average cost of a school uniform is just over £340 for primary school children and around £450 for those in secondary education, according to DfE figures. And he goes on to say, we urgently need a consistent national approach to school uniform support to ensure no child is disadvantaged simply because of where they live. And then the LGA, the membership group for English councils, said while some councils choose to help parents with the cost of school uniforms, funding pressures on council budgets make it increasingly difficult for them to continue these concessionary grants. And then the rest of the article, it just goes on to give a number of case studies with parents who are struggling. So I think there's a few things to comment on here. So firstly, £340 for a school uniform, £450 for a school uniform. Bloody hell. Have these uniforms got solid gold liner? Are they stitched by the finest Italian tailors? What is going on? I've got lots of opinions about this, most of which can just be summarised as this is absolutely bloody stupid. But to be serious for a second, firstly, as a country, we've financialised higher education, so universities, and we financialised pretty much every other aspect of our society. So why did we think that primary and secondary education would be any different? So it's hard to get exact figures, but data shows that the average price of a school uniform in 2010 was somewhere around £100 to £150, and it's now increased obviously to between £300 and £450. So the academisation of our school system, it was always about opening the school system up to private profit. So school uniform, even though it's just a small part of the overall cost of education, it was never going to be immune to that profit motive. Secondly, the article shows how backwards we are in England and how austerity has been absolutely hardwired into every aspect of the state. Local government funding from central government has been decimated since 2010. So as he talked about in the article there, there's very little cash around for these nice to haves. And most councils are just going into the red, just providing children's and adult social care. But having said that, it's really good to see Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland taking a more progressive approach to this. So it shows that perhaps there is a way. But then I just wanted to talk more generally about what this tells us about the UK in 2025. What we have here, effectively, is two strands of neoliberalism converging to create a perfect storm for already hard-up parents. So firstly, we have the decimation of local government services, in this case, councils having enough money to support their poorest residents. And then secondly, we have the financialisation of our school system. And the end result is that all the costs are passed on to the end user, in this case, parents. Unfortunately, this sort of system is sort of replicated up and down our economy. And it's one of the main reasons why no normal person in this country has any disposable income anymore. Gary Stevenson talks about this a lot, about how governments, the middle class and the working class, are having their wealth sort of sucked away and transferred to the rich due to wealth inequality. And this is a very real, albeit small, but a very real example of how that system works in practice. We need a fundamental change in our society if ordinary people are going to have some money put back in their pockets. Anyway, thanks a lot, guys. See you next time.